Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third session of RDI Worldwide's People Matters, our Global HR virtual conference. I'm very warm welcome to everybody to join this session to focus on Korean HR labor law changes in the policy and implications when it comes to organizations. I'm very happy to have been able to put together a panel for this session. And so we have three guests for you joining me on this particular specialized session. Allow me just to briefly introduce them one by one, and then we will jump right into today's session. So first of all, Anthony Chang is here as our legal specialist, a qualified legal labor attorney with more than 20 years of international experience working at law firms in both Korea and the US, has been an in-house counsel for Samsung and Philip Morris, and is currently a senior foreign attorney at Shin Kim's Employment and Labor Practice Group. So very warm welcome, Anthony. Secondly, we have EJ Kim, who is a senior regional HR director, has a specialization in global companies based in Korea, focusing on HR strategy and over a number of years, and has a really truly illustrious list of companies that she has worked for, such as SFS Express, Fresenius Kabi, Gucci, BAT, Eli Lilly, and Bristol Myers Squibb. Now, EJ told me that she has always had a very strong alignment of HR to the business side. So it's going to be great to hear how the regulation is affecting that aspect and how these perspectives are changing. Welcome, EJ. And thirdly, our third guest presenter for this session is Seon-Ju Jang. Now, Seon-Ju started her career at Autoliv, a Swedish company, and is now currently the HR director at Brose, a German automotive supplier company. So a career spanning a number of years of global companies based in Korea in the automotive sector. And it's going to be really great to hear her insights in terms of the manufacturing perspective and how maybe that varies to some of the other B2C and other areas that the panel is experienced in. I know that you did have a rather serious car accident recently, so I'm really glad to see that you are back to your fitness and able to join us today on the session. So thank you to all three for joining. So the way that the session is going to run, if you let me just explain that, we have identified a couple of the most major changes in Korean labor law in the last couple of years, and we're going to be taking a step through each of those. We will have Anthony give a little bit of a kind of overview, a kind of summary of the current status in terms of the changes which have recently come in, and then we will break into the panel discussion with the other panelists in terms of to hear how those relate to the company's perspective, organization perspective. So with that, I do encourage all participants to also ask questions. We will be having a Q&A towards the end of the session, so please do click the Q&A button at the bottom, write up your questions there, and we'll get to them either issue by issue or towards the end. And with that, let me hand over to Anthony, who's going to introduce the first key topic that we're going to discuss.
Okay, great. Just want to load up the, hold on just a second. Here we go. Okay, so can you see the slide?
We sure
Yes.
Can. Okay, good. So as Gordon mentioned, we are going to go through 4 issues today. Hopefully we can cover all of it in a little bit of detail and have some discussions. I'll set things up with what the law says and give some background, and then we can start the discussions from the company perspective. So the first one is overtime work. So a lot of the companies with more than 50 employees have already started to deal with the 52-hour work week restriction. But starting from July 1st, 2021, companies with 5 to 49 employees will also be subject to the overtime restrictions. And those restrictions are, in a 40-hour work week, you can have up to 12 hours of overtime per week. And as a little bit of background, in the past, there had been two separate regimes with the Labor Ministry pushing for kind of a extra holiday hours, 8 hours on Saturday, 8 hours on Sunday, that were outside the purview of the overtime restrictions. And that basically gave companies up to 68 hours for the work week. That has now been legislated to strictly 52-hour maximum in terms of overtime. And in Korea, as you are probably aware, there are criminal liabilities and penalties for even fairly mundane type of violations, including overtime. So if you are in violation of the overtime restrictions, it can result in a criminal penalty of up to 2 years imprisonment or a fine of up to 20 million Korean won. And there is a statutory allowance for overtime work. So you have to pay a premium for overtime hours, and it is 50% of the wages. And these are cumulative. So there's also a 50% premium for nighttime work and a 50% premium for holiday work. So for example, if you worked overtime at night and this past 10 o'clock, then you would also have to pay 50% for each of those. So it would be a 100% premium. So that's something you have to take into consideration with your overtime. And how the authorities usually investigate for overtime is usually through a complaint or through some type of whistleblower action, sometimes from the labor unions. But when there is a complaint to be investigated, the Labor Ministry will ask to see your records for overtime. And that's why it's important for you to monitor and track and keep good written records of both your overtime approvals and tracking the total number of working hours per employee. So it's really important, if you haven't done so already, to have some type of process for a prior approval for overtime and then a tracking system. Because when it comes down to a Labor Ministry investigation, that's what they're looking for. They need some written evidence of what hours were actually worked by the employee. So you need to have that ready. And that's, I guess, part of the preparation for preparing for when this law takes effect for small and medium companies that are between 5 and 49 employees. Other companies have also taken into account flexible work arrangements. And one other topic that has come up, especially in light of the COVID-19, a lot of companies are working from home, but it doesn't mean that you're free from your requirements to monitor and track overtime and working hours. So you have to have a process as well for employees who work from home to make sure that they're not working overtime beyond the amounts and that they're paid properly if there is overtime. Okay, and a question that always comes up in relation to overtime is, how do you count it? What things are included in terms of your working hours? So, are the break times included? Are, a lot of times the questions came up with respect to, say, for example, a driver. Okay, a driver takes you to the meeting, but then seems to have a break time in between the meeting until he has to bring you back to the office. Now, is that considered full working time, or is it a break time in between? And the rule is that any working hours that are practically spent under direction and supervision of the management or the employers is considered working time. So in order to be considered break time, it has to be clearly distinguished between work hours and break time. It has to be predictable for the workers, and then the workers have to be able to freely use their break time. So in my example, if the driver is still on call, in case the meeting breaks up early, is still waiting for you to finish the meeting, that's not really break time. If the driver goes back to the office and comes back, then it could be considered break time from when he has taken you to the meeting. So it's really important for companies to determine what is included in the break time and what's included in the working hours. So with that, maybe we can go to the panel for discussion.
Sure. Thank you for that initial outline. So, Seon-Ju, EJ, what has been the general perception of this when it comes to employees and companies? Has this been welcomed? Is this a good thing, or has this just been, another headache for HR to have to deal with?
I think it depends on which industry you are working in. Actually, when I work for luxury industry or logistic company, it's not easy to control and manage the 52-hour per week, because we have kind of regular working hour, depends on department store and also like airport. So it's not easy to manage the employees overtime properly. And also employee already used to work, kind of overtime, depends on, working hour in department store. So if, we try to reduce their overtime, they have a lot of, complaint from employee sides.
Got it. Seon-Ju, would you like to jump in on this?
In our case, there was some funny situation because the part who understand the situation and support this kind of changes the most was the German headquarters, because they have the most strict labor regulations. So they already have this kind of regulation in their labor law. So they understand this situation, and they know that there is nothing that we can control. So they support. But the funny thing was the employees in our company hates this kind of changes. So there was lots of complaints from employees and also managers in Korean side that about these changes. Also for HR, there was lots of headaches how to make regulations, how to categorize, and how to, as Mr. Chang mentioned, what kind of definition we should set as a breaking hours and so on. And one of the complaints that I got from the employee side was, I think many of the foreign companies already have some kind of flexibility in terms of the working hours. And they already have, in our case, we already have flexible working hour system and selective working hour system. So we were able to decide our working hour, when to start and when to finish, because we have lots of meetings at night with the other countries. But by making this kind of restrictions, we reduce this kind of freedom for our employees. And also we have employees decide skip the lunch and go home early. But by fixing this kind of things, that they reduce this kind of freedom. And also the direct workers we have in our plant, they reduce this kind their salaries. So there was lots of complaints to HR why they need to deal with this kind of things, and there was nothing that we can support for our employees.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe related to that, Anthony, maybe you can shed some light on this. is this really being actively enforced? Is this something that is being very much taken upon? I mean, I'm sure companies that are heavily unionized are very much taking up this agenda to making sure it's enforced. Are we seeing a wide variety in the level of enforcement, or is it not? Is it much more of a gentle transition? Anthony, I think you're muted. I don't hear you speaking. I see your lips moving.
There we go. Is that better?
Okay. Yep. There you go.
So I mean, for this administration, this legislation was one of the keystones for their policy of work-life balance. So it's something that's taken very seriously. Up until last year, it was enforced for larger companies when it first went into effect. And the problem was last year, a lot of the investigations and audits were put on hold because of COVID-19. So there has been kind of a slowdown, but now they're starting up again. So we are seeing more and more investigations. And prior to the slowdown from COVID-19, there were a lot of investigations, and especially for multinational companies. They were heavily focused on large multinational companies. And they, I think, were pretty vulnerable. And I think this is something that Seon-Ju brought up. It's because the foreign companies have to have meetings with headquarters or with other affiliates in different time zones. And so they are, they naturally have a lot of what might be considered overtime unless they have some type of flexible or selective working hour system in place. So it's definitely something that I expect to see a lot more enforcement to come from the administration.
Okay, shall we move on to our second topic?
Oh, well, actually, I think for this one, it's
Yes.
really important to
Yeah.
to make sure that the companies have some type of written record. And because if you don't, they will find a way to figure out what the actual hours are, whether it comes from reports from the employees themselves, or sometimes they keep track of your security key card records when you check in and check out of your building. So if it's so important that you have some type of written evidence of the overtime and the actual working time. Otherwise, you're at a clear disadvantage when the investigators come for the audit.
And is it enough to just start doing that now if that's not currently being done, or is there also an element of retrospective compliance as well?
So I mean, it depends on the size of the company. So for companies that have employees between 5 and 49 employees, the laws will take effect from July 1. So as long as, for the small, medium-sized companies, as long as they are in compliance by then and keeping track, that should be fine. But I mean, the level of seriousness that companies, are approaching this issue. I mean, some of the larger companies have taken, some pretty drastic steps, including turning off the lights within 2 hours of the actual close of business, and then turning off computers, having certain policies and procedures in place to show the labor ministry that they take it seriously and they put measures in place to comply with the overtime restrictions. So it's something to consider on how you're going to defend against an investigation.
And I guess maybe one of the other things that I kind of mentioned in the intro is how this really does affect hourly wage workers totally differently to full-time salary workers. And so whereas professional services welcome this with a great hurrah, now their 100-hour weeks, which they've been working and not getting recognition for, now they don't have to, great, and they still get paid the same. Whereas for hourly workers, being able to work extra hours, being able to work those extra shifts, that's now being heavily controlled and restricted. At the very least, companies are looking at where they can reduce those hours, and so that's probably the interesting kind of dichotomy that happens from this effect of being positive and negative.
Right.
Seon-Ju, do you have a mix of those kind of workers in your company?
In our company, we have a mix of direct workers and white collar employees. So as you mentioned, we don't have any salary impact for the white collar employees, but we have an impact for the hourly wage employee in the plant. But we cannot really do something for the direct workers for the loss of the salary because of the reduced working hour, because I think it's also included in our agenda as well, but due to the significant increase of our wages, we are losing the competitiveness of our product as well. So, there is not many things that we can do to support our blue collar employees at the moment. So we also have the mixes, and if I meet some other HR managers in the same industry, we don't have these cases in the foreign companies, but if I meet some HR managers in the traditional Korean companies, not in the big company, but small companies, there are also some cases when the white collars also get the salary cut, when there are some salaries set up with base salary and the fixed, not fixed, overtime salary set up, then the HRs had to cut the portion for the overtime hour because their overtime hour is reduced. So I also know several companies where they had to reduce the white collar employees' salary as well.
Yeah, and on top of that, I think HR perspective, we have to consider about how we're gonna implement this labor policy changes, because if we keep the 52-hour work, so that means we try to manage and reduce the overtime of existing employee. That means we should hire more manpower from market. So recently we can see the cases of industrial accident. That means not matured workforce working inside, and then they got the kind of cases. So when HR manages to 52 work out, they have to consider this kind of accident and cases too.
Yeah, I think we in the creation of this session, and we were looking at what are the most important issues right now. We discussed that one. It's definitely a key one, and maybe in the future we can go into more detail on that one, and maybe even have a specific session if people are interested in that. At that point, shall we move on to our second topic?
Sounds good.
All right.
All right. Hold on. Okay. So our next topic is minimum wage, and you can see that the minimum wage increased this year from 8,590. We
don't see your screen yet.
Okay, hold on just a sec.
That's right. Yep.
So the minimum wage has increased to 8,721 in 2021. And it's notable that it's only a 1.5% increase. And this was decided last year for 2021. It's notable because in the past, this administration started off with a pledge to try to get minimum wage increased to 10,000 won by 2020. And with that in mind, you know, the initial increase from 2017 to 2018 was a whopping 16.4%. So there have been steady, large increases, but it has had some unintended consequences as well. And therefore, they're kind of slowing down. So this year, I mean, it was a bit surprising, but I think they're listening to public opinion on this one, and the increase was fairly small compared to prior years.
So what are some of these direct impacts that have affected your respective industries?
Maybe I can start. So I think my industry affected a lot because of the significant increase of the minimum wage. In our case, we investigated more where to automate the processes, especially in the plant, and also where to outsource the resources to the best cost countries like India or some or the most reasonable locations in China, or some other European locations as well. And also because our customer in the automotive industry are still looking for the most cost competitive automotive supplier. And if we are still increasing the labor wages, then we are keep losing the competitiveness because the material cost is keep increasing, and we need to find a solution to be more competitive. And so we should find some. We had to find some way to be most competitive to compete with our competitors. So currently we are working on this kind of project to introduce some robots, and for example, in the logistics area, we are making some scanning machine like gloves to scanning instead of human beings. And just one people can wearing the gloves and just scanning instead of several people. And this kind of work that we are doing at the moment.
It sounds like some really big impacts when it comes to that, and I guess that so would it be right to say that from a global perspective that it has, in this particular area, in the short term at least, it's reduced the competitiveness? Is that right, a fair kind of summary?
Yes, right. But and one of the benefit of the global companies, we have production site in most of the all locations. And when I compare my responsible areas, we also have a footprint in the Thailand as well. And so our, for example, our business unit within the business, we can also consider the options in the Thailand to increase the competitiveness as well. So we don't need to use our production site in Korea only, but we can also consider the options in the cheaper locations.
So a short-term loss, but some of the things which you mentioned about development seem like that could be an area for future competitiveness. Sure. Investment in R&D, investment in moving to better ways of competing. So I guess that perhaps a bit of short-term pain for some long-term gain. When we look at the big picture, perhaps.
Right.
Jay, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, my case actually, the HR from the multinational company, they have to look at, carefully about their current, the current employees' salary level, especially fashion industry or call center or, luxury business and, delivery business as well, because they emphasize, variable pay target to maximize, sales target level. That's why their, that fixed salary is kind of very close to minimum wage. So, 2 or 3 years ago, like we have a labor-friendly government that they start to, increase minimum wage rate. So it's already, 3 years ago. So if you raise up these issues to, headquarter office, they're gonna shock, So to reduce any discrepancy or surprising between headquarter and local company, has to look at the current employees minimum wage, especially who has really the strong and very strong variable pay target.
Sure, absolutely. I think, and that's always what is so clear to me is that very strong opposite reactions depending on industry, depending on contract status, employee status. And so this is always, there are these unexpected consequences that come out. And of course, that what was clear from what Anthony showed is that first job was 16%. And I remember the news at the time, 16%. I mean, that really made global headlines at the time for being such a large jump. And now we've kind of yo-yoed back to a 1% increase. Whereas, if we could have somehow had a smoother transition, then perhaps all stakeholders could have better adjusted over time. But I guess that is where we are right now. Shall we move swiftly on to our third topic?
Sure.
All right, Anthony, back over to you.
All right. Let me load this back up. Okay. So the next topic is employee status, fixed term versus permanent employees. And currently, Korea has a 2-year rule, so that if you are a contracted employee for a fixed term, that the maximum number of years, consecutive years of employment before you become permanent is 2 years. And if it exceeds 2 years and you don't fall within certain exceptions, then the employee will be deemed a permanent employee of the company. And on top of the 2-year term, if, let's say you have a 1-year contract, and if the employee has a reasonable expectation that the contract will be renewed, and the circumstances could be, every other employee was renewed, there hasn't ever been a case where it hasn't been renewed. Even though it's a 1-year contract, if there is a reasonable expectation that it will be renewed, then it could end up being deemed also a permanent employee. And if you try to terminate the employee after the end of the contract and they make the claim that they had the expectation that it would be renewed, then you cannot dismiss them. You cannot end the contract. They have basically become a permanent employee of yours. And therefore, you would need justifiable cause to dismiss under the Labor Standards Act.
That sounds to me, I mean, that immediately seems like a gray area. Gray areas are terrible for employees and employers, but fantastic for lawyers. As they get busy to try to sort out this great area. Perhaps, Seon-Ju, have you experienced this particular effect within your area? Anthony, if you could just stop the sharing. Thanks.
In our case, we hire as a permanent employee as much as we can. And the cases we hire the temporary or fixed term employee is when we only have some replacement for the maternity leave or childcare leave, or some picks for the project related topics and so on. But when I faces this kind of topics, I always ask some questions by myself, for whom this kind of restrictions we have, because as an maybe I'm worked too long as an HR, but although I would like to continue the employment relationship with the temporary employee, but due to this kind of restrictions, I must end the relationship with the employee. That's also sad. So, and I think it would be same for the temporary worker as well. So.
Sure,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
a really
go ahead, AJ.
headache. Yeah, it's a really headache for HR person. If you hire like someone who generate the sales volume, it's easy to get the head count from headquarters. So we easy to convert their contract status to permanent employee after 2 years. But if you hire like administration support job, it's not easy, and it's not easy to justify how we're gonna convert their headcount to permanent. So even recently, I received lots of feedback from headquarters, like, oh, Asia Pacific, the GM has no executive secretary as permanent employee. How come Korea gonna have executive secretary as a permanent employee? So their approach is quite reasonable, but it's based on our local labor. We have to follow it. So that's why in the pharmaceutical industry, they only hire like a secretary, receptionist only for 1 year. So I don't think it's good for employee and employer too. So it's a really headache still,
Yeah, so one of the unexpected consequences that that I was experiencing, with some of my clients, is that, in fact, it has actually increased the amount of contract labor, since there is now rather than the intended effect is 2 years and convert. Instead, companies will just terminate before and just and take on somebody new, and just repeat this kind of contract labor situation, which net effect is an overall increase in contract as opposed to a reduction and conversion of. Is that something that you've seen widely, Anthony?
Oh yeah, I mean it is a very, very common story. And the stories that both EJ and Seon-Ju have said, I've seen it when I was in-house as well. After almost 2 years, the employee has now been trained, knows what he or she is doing, and you have to let them go and hire someone new. And it's very frustrating for the business to have to keep circulating every 2 years. And we've had, for example, expats with drivers. And the drivers are usually dispatched workers, and after 2 years they're switched. But just when the driver knows the family routines and where to go and the schedules, then you have to let them go and get someone else to learn from scratch. And same with receptionists, same with secretaries, and it's a shame. I think you said it correctly when you said that the policy, the intent of the policy was to have more permanent employees, but instead what it's done is made this kind of treadmill of rotating 2-year contracts. So it's one area where the intent of the law was to create more permanent position, but the actual effect is something very different.
I know that the public sector was the first area to begin that process. Has it had a positive effect in that area as opposed to the private sector?
So there was a very highly publicized case about the airport workers at Incheon Airport. And so the administration really pushed to have more public workers become permanent employees. But it had also a very unintended consequence as well. So the announcement was that more of the contracted and temporary workers would become permanent employees. But what that did was it offended the permanent employees who, fought to get that position and worked hard to get that position instead of a temporary position. And so they actually, had demonstrations to protest this, how come, it was so difficult for us to get our permanent position, and now you're handing it to all of these temporary workers. So, that also had an unintended consequence as well.
EJ, did you want to come in there?
You know what? I expect we have more flexibility about the labor market, because in Korea we are very restrict and limited and flexibility. So as I mentioned before, it's not good for employee side. It's not good for employer side as well, because HR should be like the support employers as well, and also we have to look at the business as well. So if we have a certain headcount, we have to consider about business first. So as I mentioned before, if you put the more headcount on the sales generation, so it will be great for company and employee sides as well. But if we don't have any flexibility about the supporting positions, it's not good for our industry and labor market as well.
Sure.
So I'd like to jump in there. So there's this combination of very employee-friendly rules, which make it very difficult to terminate employees, and I think that's the other end of it, right? So if it were easy to manage employees, then I think more companies would be more open to hiring permanent positions. But because it's so difficult, that becomes a disincentive to make these temporary workers into permanent employees.
And coming from European background, where the status of a contractor is very different. There are certain industries where only the very senior and experienced people get to become contractors, and as a result they go on to a higher compensation. They are more freely able to switch company and really be specialist contractors. Now that's very different to the perception of contract workers, the status of contract workers in Korea. Do we see any signs of this change? Do we see any kind of move towards that? I mean, are some of these changes a step in the right direction in that way?
I think we're still pretty far away from that. And just as an example, there are laws to prevent discrimination against temporary and contracted workers, because they are seen as less than the normal regular permanent employees. And that was also the case for the Incheon Airport employees as well. So the permanent employees thought that the contracted workers were a level below them, not a level above them. So I think the perception is still very different in Korea.
Okay, shall we move on to our fourth topic?
Sure. Okay.
We don't have too much time, but let's touch on it.
Okay. Let me load it up. Okay. So under the Equal Employment Opportunity and Family Care Act, we just shortened it to Equal Employment Act. It's possible to have reduced working hours. If an employee applies for reduced working hours, for reasons of family care or for his or her own health conditions or preparation for retirement or even schoolwork or studies, then the company must grant the work reduction in working hours. And the amount is anywhere between 50 to 30 hours of reduction. And this can go for a maximum of 1 year. So it's already effective. And for companies with 30 to 299 employees, it was effective for them starting January of this year. And then even for companies between 5 and 29 employees, it will be effective from January 2022. So what this means is, if you have a normal 40-hour work week and they apply for reduced working hours, then their actual working time can be anywhere from 20 to 25 hours of actual work per week.
My my feeling in terms of the application of this on a size of employee basis is that this is something that is absolutely should be the norm for larger companies and can be accommodated, with some change, and obviously a change period has been given. But this is probably something that really can be a big impact on smaller businesses.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe EJ or Seon-Ju, would you like to kind of speak on it?
Actually, we have several cases from luxury industry. As you may know, maybe you don't know. Actually, we have two different, the employee from luxury industry. One is office employee, and second one is store staffs, we call that way. So we have a very limited manpower from office staff. I can say like 10% of total headcount is office staff, 90% is store staffs. That means we have a very limited manpower to support the store staffs, including all other supporting function, HR, finance, and PR and communication and merchandising. So it's not easy, to adapt this kind of policy. And also it's easy to abuse this policy because I want to take a break. So I want to use this policy because we have a right to claim this kind of policy to company. But if we don't have that employee, that experienced employee, so it's gonna be really headache for us and obstacle as well, because it's not easy to hire experienced employee who can handle right away. So I'm a little bit afraid, if employee abuse this kind of policy. Before that, we only have a family care leave, just like this. So that case, so that we have to provide the evidence about the from doctor's letter. That's why it's not easy actually. But if we have this kind of the new policies, maybe it's not easy for HR and company as well.
Right.
We're having questions coming in on this particular topic.
Right.
It seems to be the one that has spurred the questions. So a very quick one, I guess. Any support from the government for SMEs to apply this rule? Sure.
So not only the employee, but also the employer can apply for certain subsidies from the government. And so they are available depending on eligibility. You can apply for, for the family leave, for the family care leave, for reduced working hours as well. And, some of these subsidies are for, anything from looking for a replacement to a small subsidy to help the employee.
Great to hear. Good to hear, especially for SMEs. Another question, which is, does the employee's salary get reduced pro rata in line with the number of hours that are reduced?
Right. So these are unpaid leave, right? So for the family care leave up to a year, it's unpaid. So you would.
Okay, unpaid. And another question is, can over hours be compensated with more holiday allowance or free hours?
Right. So one way to compensate for overtime is replacement days, replacement hours. So it is possible to give more, I guess, holiday, more
Days in lieu.
leave. Yeah. So you use leave to compensate for some of the overtime compensation.
Okay. And a question related to visas. Is there a preferred or more convenient work visa that protects more in regards to the permanent position, for the example of E7 versus F type?
Well, definitely, for example, the F4 visa, and which is an overseas Korean, allows you to work without having something, without having a separate, when you register, it's because you are seen as a previously registered Korean national that you get the visa status. And E7 would be, if you are a foreign professional, and that is directly tied to your place of employment. So, for example, if you change your place of employment, you would have to renew a new E7 visa. So, yeah, I guess in that respect, the F4 will be much safer for you.
Yeah, or other F-type, foreign spouse,
Right.
the F6, or other dependent-related, as you say, not related to the job, obviously.
Right, but on
giving you
different
the right
grounds.
to stay.
Correct.
Exactly. All right. Well, we have hit the nail on the head in terms of time. We've covered the 4 major topics that we wanted to, and I mean, questions started coming in there at the end. I'm sure that we could have spent more time to answer them. So thank you to everybody who has been on this session. I hope you found it valuable. I hope that perhaps it has induced more questions, more specific questions, in which case there is a good person to be able to contact with Anthony Chang from Shin and Kim. Thank you very much for providing the basis, and also thank you very much to EJ and Seon-Ju for bringing the industry perspective as well.